Hi, babies. Today we're going to talk about which house system should I use. And I know that there are so many videos already out on this subject and even more opinions and strong ones. Um, but I'm going to give you my take on it. And I'm also going to give you lots of information, origin information, the actual mathematical calculations, the difference between the house systems. And I don't believe indoctrination. So after I give you all the information, I'm actually going to give you some helpful qualifiers so you can figure out which house system is actually good for you. Let's just start out with some definitions and some basics because I love the idea that we might have some beginners and I want you to be able to understand everything else that I'm talking about once we leave the definitions part. So, astronomy is the study of the celestial bodies, planets, asteroids, things that happen in the sky. Astrology is the effect that those celestial bodies have on us because we and everything are energy particles. A birth or natal chart is the mathematically mapped snapshot of what the sky looked like when we were born. Houses are the sections of life, the arenas and areas of life that those transits will take place in. Okay, we all set? Let's talk about origins. Astrology starts 24,000 years ago. It's dated back to the Babylonians. And now around 100 AD, Ptolemy is born. Later on, he writes a book called the Tetris Biblios, which is just means 4 books in Latin. And so this is his great work, one of his great works, but it's his great work on astrology. And it's loved and interpreted and translated into many different languages and debated ad nauseum. He sees astrology as almost medicine, and swears that it's a very practical use. But also, there's a lot that insinuates. He also thought that it should be applied emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. Shoot to the 12th century, and we have someone who kind of articulated this house system based off Ptolemy, meaning that it should indeed be implied spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically. Um, that gentleman was not Placidus. That was Abraham Ezra. However, Placidus hears him articulate this and puts it into a system. It's then coined the Placidus system. With Placidus, it looks like this. If you're born at like 15 degrees Taurus, right? That is going to be your ascendant. And let's just put up a chart. So we can see that exactly the 15 degrees at that moment of birth, that is where the ascendant goes. And then the 12th house is going to be shared by Aries and Taurus. And the first house is going to be shared by Taurus and Gemini, and so on and so on. So at the same time, the MC and IC axis and all of that information, you can Google about MC and IC axis, but it's used a lot in Placidus. That stays the same in everyone's chart because if you're born at 2 degrees Taurus, that's going to be your rising. And if you're born at 20 degrees Taurus, that's going to be your rising. And each house in every system has 30 degrees from 0 to 29 degrees. So Placidus, you with me? Whatever the degree is that you're born, it calculates time by the degree of the rising sign, and the rest of the chart follows the rising sign. It also puts heavier emphasis on your MCIC, and it also works in quadrant houses. So there's extra flavors in the cake, so to speak, when we're looking at a chart, when we use Placidus. And this is what's used then for centuries. Yes, it's given heat by the Catholic Church. Spoiler alert. For applying spiritually, and astrology for a little while kind of falls out of favor somewhat. Side note, astrology was for smart people. Before computers, all of these calculations on these birth charts, these mathematical, I mean, you're talking about taking a snapshot of the sky. We're talking brilliant people to map these out. And you had to be good at mapping it out, because if you weren't going to be good at mapping it out, you weren't going to give accurate predictions, and no one was going to respect, right, you or the study of astrology. So this was a big deal, and it was actually taught in university. So then it gets kind of pulled from university courses. This is over the centuries. It just kind of falls out of favor a little bit. And then it comes back into popularity. Now we're going to fast forward to about the 1970s, and a group of very tenacious, brilliant astrologers, historians decide they're going to go back to find the ancient, recover and translate ancient texts. Upon doing so, they discover the whole house system, Hellenistic astrology, um, and discovered it's the first system ever used. 100%. It's was the first system. It's the ancient Greek system, and whole house is named because those 0 to 29 degrees occupy the houses with one sign in them. So it looks like this, and we'll put up a chart. The 15 degrees Taurus is still starting that first house at the rising sign at 0 degrees Taurus, and they kind of move the ascendant. So now the whole first house is Taurus, the whole second house is Gemini, and so on and so on. And there's movement in the whole chart, because now the MCIC axis is going to be moved. It's not that they don't get used, but they could be anywhere from the 8th house to the 11th house in whole sign houses, where Placidus is going to look at the MC next to your 10th house as like your purpose. It's used in the quest of finding your soul's purpose, and like not your day-to-day work, but your legacy that you leave attached to your purpose, because so it's going to be attached to the 10th house. So it's very different. It's very similar and very different at the same time. And what's interesting is that this first system and this whole house system literally had just gone missing, like on a milk carton, missing, gone for centuries. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody was using it. So then after it's found, we have two schools of thought. The first system is the traditional, so it's the right one. And then other people saying, well, Placidus is correct because it looks at the internal as well as the external circumstances that astrology can predict and see. Now we have the whole community in an uproar. It's like the breaking up of a boy band. Your Placidus or your whole house. It's like DC and Marvel, right? I'm such a nerd. So that's the origins of whole house and Placidus. Yes, there are other house systems, but today we're just going to work on those two. So we're going to go into, before we do, you know the drill. You're on YouTube. Do me a favor, hit that like button, leave a comment. I love having conversation in the comments afterwards, and we do check our comments after the original airing. So do me a favor and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. But especially hit that like button, because it's helpful to you. Then YouTube knows it'll be helpful to more people. So two, predictive. The biggest debate on whole house versus Placidus is which one is more accurate for predictions. Let me say this. I think that there are amazing astrologers that that use whole house. And I think that you can probably get some bang on steady predictions about external things that could happen in your life um, using whole house. The difference is that Placidus is going to add an extra layer of prediction. So, one, and this is so important, if you've obtained a birth chart, check to see whether it's Placidus house or whole houses, because you can love another astrologer on, like, you can look at more than one astrologer on YouTube. You're allowed. And you might love a lot of what they have to teach, right? Or you might think that their predictions for big events, for like global events, are so on, so you want to watch them for, you know, your monthly horoscope. And if it's a really great astrologer, they'll tell you to listen to your rising sign, because that's where your chart begins, blah blah blah. Go watch my big three if you don't know what I'm talking about. And the thing is, though, is like, I am a late rising degree. So if there's a whole house, I like to look at my own chart, and then I like to get information from all places, because again, I don't believe in indoctrination, and I always want to keep myself as informed as possible. So there's an astrologer that I have the utmost respect for. They happen to use whole house systems, but I have to watch Libra rising to get an accurate. So if you've had your chart done in whole house, right, and you love a Placidus astrologer that you're watching every month, because they're talking about the psychological, emotional, and spiritual changes that might happen with the external changes that are happening in the transits, yeah, you're going to have to calculate you're going to have to look at what your chart looks like in Placidus. Make sense? Because the houses can move and the planets can move natally. And there's going to be more in that on 3. We're going to talk about celebrities, so please don't please don't move. We're going to go over a celebrity's chart so I can show you what that looks like. It's like if you came to both a whole house astrologer and a Placidus astrologer, or what might be looked at as an evolutionary astrologer rather than traditional Hellenistic astrology. We can both tell you about the possible upcoming uh, illness of a loved one, or the crossing of a loved one. Um, the Placidus evolutionary astrologer is more than likely also going to tell you what psychological and transformational effect that death is going to have on your life. I also find that more astrologers that also employ their gifts, intuitive gifts, mediums that are also astrologers, tend to use Placidus, because their concern, as much as predicting external things, I mean, it's what we come to for an astrologer, right? Like, we want to know, is he the one? Is money coming? Is it a good time to leave my job? You know, what's transiting my 10th house? Right? There's all these different ways to use an astrologer. There's all these different reasons that we would use an astrologer for prediction. And the Placidus evolutionary astrologer, for me, I'm going to use Placidus, because I'm a girl who's looking at the wounds in your chart and how they transform you, and how you can transmute, and how you can evolve, and where you came in from, and your last life, and what your purpose is, and how to work towards your north node, and all of that. So I quite love Placidus, because it really is looking internally besides externally. And you know, there's so many predictive tools. We can use progressed chart, and we can use timing lords, and you know, there's those are available to any house system. So you're always going to get the old age debate of whether it's supposed to be used spiritually and emotionally. And, quite frankly, maybe you don't want to talk about your feelings, then that's okay. I mean, and there may be some astrologers that don't want to pick your guts up off the floor. I'm here for the guts on the floor and picking them up. And um, I want to attend to my clients inside and out. So that's going to be the difference in predictive. I do find for myself that that whole other layer makes a huge difference in the predictions. I feel like they're a little bit more fine-tuned. That's my experience. Before we get into 3, let me just say we have an amazing team here on Soul Navigation. All the booking links are in the description box if you would like to have your guts picked up off the floor. I'm your girl. You can book an appointment with anyone, and everybody kind of has a different specialty. It's so lovely to have the diversity on the team that we do. And this has been my 3-part series. Next week, please be here for Kira, who's just beautiful inside and out and so gifted. And she's doing a soulmate series. You don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it. All right. 3. How to choose. Here's what I say all the time. Like with Placidus and Whole House, if you don't want to involve yourself in somebody's psychological, emotional, and spiritual transformation, don't you wish you had $1 for every time I said that? Then maybe you want to use Whole House because it is a little easier to calculate. It just is, because you can easily figure out, if you ask me, it's easy. The chart ruler on Placidus is just whichever sign is at that beginning cusp. That's your chart ruler for that house. But there's a little less math in Whole House. And you can get some external predictions and use progress chart and other things to give pretty good predictions. If you're looking to address someone inside and out and their soul's purpose, and deal a lot with their wounds, then I think Placidus is probably your choice. If you're looking for somebody to help you through your wounds, a lot of people come to me because they are looking for that transformation. So I definitely feel like it's my responsibility to use Placidus because I want to take everything into account so I can be really accurate for them, and also because it shows me the best path to their healing. The cake. I feel like I'm always talking about cake, right? So, there's that cake that you get at the same place and it's made the same way every time and it's good, right? Because it's cake and it's dependable and it's good. And then there's that cake that you have that has another layer of flavor. Like just when you think it's all hit you, something else comes along and hits you with another layer. And that cake is more than just delicious cake. It becomes an experience. And it becomes an experience that stays with you and changes the way that you see cake. And sometimes it changes the way that you want cake. For me, that's the difference between Whole House and Placidus. I would like to use a celebrity's chart. I will tell you that the best way to figure out what's right for you, besides deciding what kind of astrologer you want to be and how much you want to deal with somebody's evolution, take 10 charts of people that you know pretty well, and I would do at least one celebrity. And for at least 3 months, I want you to really, really study that chart and all its aspects in both systems. And I want you to look at the transits for those 3 months or more and do some predictions. And you don't have to tell anyone else if you're just starting out, but write them down for yourself, journal. And then look at the end of every month and see which one is closer. And then talk to people about if you see something coming up for somebody and you see that it may be emotionally rough on them, right? Talk to somebody you're close enough to ask them, what did you go through last month? Or how did that feel for you? Or did you feel this way or that way? Um, and see what lines up and what looks really the most dead on accurate. I almost said it the way I normally say it, but I'm being good because we're on YouTube. you want dead on accuracy. Now, because I am a big nerd, I'm going to use the Marvel icon, Robert Downey Jr. And I'm going to use him for a couple of reasons. One, if we want to talk about somebody where psychological, spiritual transformation applies. And we all know who he is, and he's been around long enough that some of us older kids remember when he was in and out of court and in and out of jail. And everyone knows him as Iron Man, right? I mean, even if you don't watch those movies, you know he's Iron Man. And if you don't, go. It's so good. We're going to look at the difference of his chart between Whole House and Placidus. Glasses on, detail work. So looking at his chart in Whole House, like obviously we can see he's Leo rising and he's an Aries sun. And he's got that beautiful Taurus moon. But what I want you to pay attention to and what I'm looking at is that 8th house. As an evolutionary astrologer, I am always paying attention to the asteroids as well. And Chiron is something I think all astrologers kind of pay attention to. But it's one of the first things that I look at. And so it's in his 8th house, and there's a strong trine to Scorpio, from his Pisces to his Scorpio, strong trine between his Neptune and his Chiron. And Chiron in the 8th house can often mean addictions and whatnot. And it's also right there with Saturn. And Saturn feels like rules. I mean, you're talking about like a fire sun and a fire moon, with Saturn in the 8th house of the occult, of the deep psychological, which is going to feel like oppression right next to his wounds. And we have Charcolo also in his 8th house. And this is where it gets important. Now let's look at his house system in Placidus. And what we can see is that a lot of stuff absolutely is the same, right? His Pluto is still in Virgo. That's going to make him go back and forth, which he did. He lost everything, gained everything, lost. It was like a yo-yo, which is typical with people who are struggling with addiction. But now that Charcolo, that asteroid in his 8th house, still in Pisces, moves into his 7th house. And this is why it's so different. If you know, I'll try to keep it together. If you know his story, he gets his happy ending. He evolves, he transforms. And when somebody struggles with addiction their whole life, they see themselves as their wounds, and it feels very Saturnian. It feels very oppressive. And what's so beautiful is when that Charcolo, that asteroid, and forgive me if you pronounce it differently, moves into his 7th house in Placidus, we see his wife, Susan, who changed everything for him. Chiron is your wounds. Sharkalo is the gentle wife of Chiron. It's goddess wisdom. And while it in the sky transits close to Uranus and Saturn, it never intersects with Saturn. It really doesn't have anything to do. And even mythically, Sharkalo doesn't really, her story doesn't intersect with Saturn, which is great because Saturn was kind of a not a great guy. um, Chiron needs a gentle wife, and that's who she is. She was a shaman. She was a woman of wisdom. She was gentle and loving and healing. And now that is in his seventh house, and he is absolutely responsible for his own recovery. But that influence changes everything. It just does. And you can watch a million interviews with Robert Downey Jr. talking about his wife, Susan, and how things changed. And then of course, Stan Lee comes along and the rest is history. And it's really, really beautiful to watch. Somebody went, I'm going to stop talking about Robert Downey Jr. and his wife and Sharkalo and all that before I go into the ugly cry on YouTube. But this is what I mean, guts on the floor. Like, that's such a beautiful transformation. It really has to do with his soul feeling understood when that asteroid is in his seventh house of partnership. And it's a really beautiful example of how those little differences make a big difference in that person's life, in the map of their life. And things that we can see. Wouldn't have been beautiful if he had gone to an astrologer and said, I see peace coming for you. In the end, you win. And this beautiful person is probably going to come into your life. Who doesn't want that? So that is my argument for Placidus. If you are going to be a transformational astrologer that's going to use astrology to help evolve people and help heal them and help get them through, we are getting people through some rough stuff sometimes. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that you're a little clearer on what kind of astrologer that you might want to be, because that's a big part in which system to use, and what kind of astrologer you may want to work with. I will see you real soon. I'll make sure I leave all the helpful videos in the description box, along with where you can get a really great natal chart. And remember, I love you. Now you love you. Bye.